So when it comes to wrapping barbecue, there's a lot of different opinions on it. I think that wrap is a tool, and understanding what it does is the key. For example, we do use a foil wrap on our spare ribs. Our spare ribs are like big, like 4.5 pound spare ribs that take a long time to cook. What we do is smoke them until we get that bark set initially on the outside, and then we actually baste them with sauce and wrap it and allow it to finish inside of that wrap. That does a couple things. Number one is that it provides a vehicle for collagen and some of those other more connective tissues to actually dilute slightly so that the ribs aren't as sticky. Wet ribs kind of are like braised meat. They're not as concentrated. And then when that is in there, it's also going to kind of even out the consistency of the bark to where it's not like a texture of chewy exterior and soft interior. It's going to become a little bit more even. So when we're cutting those ribs especially, they cut very nice and evenly, and you always get a clean bite on them because the outside isn't real tough. Now, wrap as it applies to brisket, there are many more opinions on. And I think that what we've settled on as our preferred method, we do use a paper wrap, which I think is probably the most common in craft barbecue. I think Aaron Franklin and John Lewis were the first people to really kind of like bring that technique to everyone else. And the butcher paper is actually different than the foil because foil is not permeable at all. So you put foil and it kind of traps all the steam inside. So it's very moist cooking. Paper, on the other hand, is somewhat breathable. So you get a good balance where you're not really steaming that bark too much, because on brisket in particular, bark is one of the bites that people really crave, especially on the burn ends and those big fat point cuts. They like that chewy bark on the outside, especially with well-rendered fat, because we trim the brisket before we smoke it. And we trim the fat deliberately so that as it renders, it gets down to nothing to where you can eat it. You don't have any of that unrendered jiggly fat that people kind of want to scrape off. So using paper on that just allows us to keep that bark and have a nice bite through consistency. And that's something that like varies from place to place. Evan Leroy and a couple other people are using a foil boat method where they're actually putting the brisket on a piece of foil and just hugging the foil up around the edges to keep the bottom side of the brisket moist and help the cooking and keep the bark exposed throughout the cooking process. So there's definitely a lot of different ways to do it. Foil is generally regarded as they call the Texas crutch because it's kind of a cheat, and it also is usually done to help through the stall, which we already talked about, where it doesn't really start to cook as well. So wrapping it at 165 right before the stall will actually help you move through that stall faster.